Welcome to The Voices of War, a podcast with a simple vision to bring to life the true costs of war through the voices of those who've lived it. I'm Maz, and I speak to soldiers, academics, refugees, peacemakers, and anyone else who's been touched by war in the hope of demystifying and, most importantly, de-glorifying it. If you like what you hear, please consider showing your support by reviewing the show wherever you get your pods. You can also support us on our Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee page. Links to both are in the show notes. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi everyone, this is Maz. So, before we get to my chat with Brigadier Ascough, I want to share some good news of a personal nature. Last Saturday, July the 2nd, Essen and I welcomed our baby boy, Darian, into the world. Both Mum and Bub are doing extremely well, and our 2-and-a-bit-year-old girl Lara is definitely enjoying her new role as a big sister. Needless to say, we're enjoying the sleepless nights at the moment, but I'm led to believe that it's all worth it, apparently. One other thing I wanted to say before we get to my chat with Mark is to apologise in advance. As you'll hear, we had a few connectivity issues, so at times the sound distorts a little. We also had a few instances of some significant background noise that I couldn't quite edit out sufficiently well. Towards the end of the episode, I also had to re-record a question to make it audible and clear, so you'll hear a slight variation in my voice. Anyway, my sincere apologies for this, and I hope that these minor imperfections won't be too distracting from what was otherwise a very fruitful and insightful conversation with a currently serving senior leader in the Australian Defence Force. I'm led to believe that this is quite a rare occurrence, especially given Mark's current role as the Director General of Intelligence at the Headquarters Joint Operations Command. Okay, let's get to the episode. My guest today is Brigadier Ascough, who is the current Director General of Intelligence at the Headquarters Joint Operations Command of the Australian Defence Force. Throughout his career, Brigadier Ascough has commanded troops at all ranks from Lieutenant to Brigadier, including platoon and company command in the 1st Intelligence Battalion, battalion command of the Royal Military College Duntroon, and most recently, he was also Commander 6th Brigade. Brigadier Ascough's operational service includes border protection operations, 2 deployments to East Timor, and 2 tours in Afghanistan. For his command of the Kabul Garrison Command Advisor Team during his 2nd tour in Afghanistan in 2017, he was awarded a Distinguished Service Medal in the 2019 Queen's Birthday Honours List. Brigadier Ascough is a distinguished graduate of the United Kingdom's Joint Services Command and Staff College, where he was recognised as the overall best student, to date the only international representative to achieve this honour. He also holds an honours degree in history from the University of New South Wales, a Masters of International Relations from Deakin University, and a Masters of Defence Studies from King's College London. Brigadier Ascough joins me today to talk about all things intelligence and how he sees the field evolve into the future. Brigadier Ascough, thank you very much for joining me on The Voices of War.
Hey, thanks, Maz. Thanks for the invitation to join you today, and feel very fortunate and a little bit overawed with the company that I'm now joining. I certainly have been highly impressed by the lineup of speakers, and I will do my best to contribute to the discussion. But I disclaimer up front that I'm not sure that I put myself in the same pantheon of speakers that you've had over the last year and a half or so. It's been very impressive to see what you've achieved.
Thank you so much for saying that, and I'm sure this will be an insightful conversation. It's certainly been one that I've been looking forward to, especially given your current job. But before we get to, I guess, your current role and what that means, you joined the Army nearly 30 years ago now. Maybe we can start with what drove that decision to join. Now I guess nearly 3 decades ago.
Yeah, sure. Unlike possibly some of your other speakers and other professional military officers that have been involved in the Voices of War, I didn't join with any sort of strong aspirations of being in the military, to be honest. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I left school. I'd gotten into a couple of different uni courses in my home state of Queensland at the 2 major universities there, and I think I'd also been offered a place at a couple of other universities interstate, including at the University of New South Wales at the Australian Defence Force Academy campus, and the ADFA one was the one that was offering a salary that came with the study, and I thought, well, maybe that'll be a good start. I can put some money aside, get some credit points up, and then move back home and go from there. And through a combination of meeting some incredibly great people who have become lifelong friends in that first year, I sort of stayed a second year. And if I'm brutally honest, my laissez-faire attitude towards personal administration shone through, and I failed to do the paperwork to get myself out of the army before a return of service obligation kicked in at the end of the second year of study, and then I was had the up to Cape York as part of the 51st Battalion Far North Queensland Regiment, and spent 2 years working and living on the Cape in what is probably one of the last parts of Australian wilderness, and really learnt a lot about myself as a young man, and also learnt a lot about our First Nations and their culture. And I also learned a lot, which I didn't know I was learning at the time, about all the things that have come to really matter over the last 20 years in military operations in terms of information warfare, intelligence collection, and building partnerships and collaborating across whole of government and with community and industry. They were all things that I got to experience in my first 2 years of service, and I didn't know all those amazing things that I was experiencing were gonna have lifelong impacts on me, but they certainly did. And from there, I just sort of kept getting into interesting roles, and here I am 28 years later, still working out what I'm going to do when I grow up.
And while you were at 51, did I hear you correctly? You saying you were Cape York, so you were Bravo Company in Weipa.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, Bravo Company.
Yeah, the Dogs of War. Well, I followed in your footsteps. I was actually I did my Reggie posting following RMC up in Bravo Company, and I can certainly echo everything you've just said about that posting and the insights it affords. It's an absolutely incredible, and I feel so fortunate to have had the chance to experience Cape York to its fullest, and getting to know the Indigenous culture and build cross-cultural relations. So I wholeheartely agree.
Yeah, certainly, and it's good to know. It's no surprise, Maz. I don't think that. It's why we obviously get on as our formative experience of living on Cape York, but. Yeah, it was an amazing first step into my military career, but again, to answer your question perhaps more succinctly than I did, was I never had aspirations or a vision that I would be in the military for now almost 30 years. But the reason why I'm still serving is because each and every time a posting cycle comes around, the military offer and the opportunity is such that it intrigues me. It engages me, and it's something that I think I can add value to. And the opportunity to work with just the great people that are in the ADF is a real value proposition. And so as a result, I've kept doing it. But as I said before, I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm now probably closer to the end of my time in the military, and I'm still yet to work out what I'm going to do when I grow up. So that's something on my to-do list. That needs to be fulfilled, but until that time, I'm certainly really enjoying what I do, and I feel very privileged to have assumed the role of Director General Intelligence here at our headquarters Joint Operations Command earlier this year. It's a fantastic role, and at a time of obviously geostrategic tensions and competition, and that means that the ADF and the military line of national power continues to have a real relevance in helping support our government in its national security and promoting its interests, and trying to shape the region to support our that national security. So yeah, amazing time to be here, and certainly been on a steep learning curve over the last few weeks.
Yeah, and certainly the world hasn't stopped or slowed down to let you settle in. It's certainly been a turbulent last month at least. But maybe for the uninitiated in our audience, what does the Director General Intelligence at the Headquarters Joint Operations Command do? What is the job?
Look, the job is to work and lead a team of intelligence military professionals and support the Chief of Joint Operations, a 3-star general who is responsible to the Chief of Defence Force for all ADF, Australian Defence Force, operational activities and actions in domestically, regionally and globally. And what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? What we seek to do is characterise the threats and the operating environments for the chief and the principal staff and for our deployed force elements. And our purpose is to try and reduce ambiguity, support decision-making for our senior leaders, primarily the Chief of Joint Operations, but also the commanders of the Joint Task Force that are deployed around the region and the globe, and to help the headquarters staff identify opportunities and to enable full spectrum operations that the ADF is authorised to conduct today and needs to prepare to conduct possibly for the future.
So not a busy job at all then.
Oh, look, it's the whole headquarters works to a full and challenging battle rhythm, but it's a sign of the times. And the beauty is, Maz, as you know, as the leader of my branch, my biggest responsibility is to empower the rest of my team and to enable them to deliver that on that purpose. And my job is to try and help them prioritise, because there's often more tasks than there is capacity. So how do I help them prioritise what we need to do, how to communicate to the Chief of Joint Operations and to the other senior staff on the headquarters what we anticipate as being future events and how we should array and use our resources to best effect in response to those future events and activities. So, it's leveraging the expertise across all the team and working, and the key point as well, Maz, is we don't try and do it all on our own. We've got to collaborate and coordinate across with the services, the Army, Navy and Air Force, with our defence civilian counterparts across the strategic policy and international policy groups and divisions, and across the rest of the defence intelligence enterprise and the wider national intelligence enterprise. So it's a large coordinating and collaborating role for us to deliver those effects and to achieve our purpose. It's not done unilaterally. It truly is a team game.
Absolutely. And that's actually a neat pivot into my next question. And again, I just don't want to assume too much from my audience, most of whom will probably be surprised that a senior intelligence officer of the Australian Defence Force was even willing to come on. But maybe we can start with, what is the role and purpose of intelligence? And I'm talking intelligence writ large. How does it support operations? How do you achieve, and you and your team achieve what your purpose is?
So I think if you were to sum it up in one singular role, it's to support decision making. But I think there's a number of sub-elements to that ultimately. And some of those are what I articulated as the purpose for our branch, but I think those purposes are in many cases universal across the intelligence enterprise, which is to characterise for decision makers and for deployed forces, or to the customer, whoever that customer may be, the threats and the nature of the operating environment in which they find themselves or we are likely to become involved in. The purpose is to help decision makers through reducing ambiguity of that in that operating environment and in relation to those potential threats, and it's to identify opportunities. Now, how do we do that? Like all good militaries and other sort of government agencies, we've tried to break that down into a cycle, and many of your listeners may have heard of and been involved directly in being parts of the intelligence cycle, which is the direction, the collection, the processing and the dissemination. And really at the Headquarters Joint Operations Command, we enable direction through advising and then acting on the direction from the Chief of Joint Operations. We directly are involved in the coordination and the authorisation of collection, and we support and are part of the Defence Intelligence and National Intelligence enterprise in the processing of the information that is collected to translate that into intelligence. And then we have a responsibility to disseminate that and share it with our customers, but also share it with our partners, so as we can build shared awareness and shared understanding across the whole of government for the Australian sense, but equally with our allies, partners and friends.
And I guess there are a number of intelligence disciplines that will certainly support, well, mainly the collection, I guess. And most of my audience will know of human intelligence, signals intelligence, electronic intelligence, so on and so forth. But one of the ones that's, I guess, gathering more and more steam, well, certainly in the wider world, is open source intelligence. And I guess one of the points here is I'll refer to what Amy Ziegart, who I listened to recently, she was on Michael Morell's podcast, Intelligence Matters. She refers to it as the 5 mores when talking about open source. So more threats, more speed, more data, more customers, and more competitors. In other words, she was saying that, there's just so much data coming down range and so many threats are emerging, including down to backyard hackers or garage hackers. Given this reality in the multi-domain battle space, how do we prepare, I guess, the intelligence analysts of the future against information overload and then, of course, the ever-important cognitive bias?
Yeah. It's the $64 million question, isn't it? How do we produce the future intelligence professional? I think to talk to the first point of your question and observation, Maz, about the prevalence of data and the increasing prominence of open source intelligence, there's a whole range in that of collection capabilities which represent the how do we get after the collection, and how do we start to get the information we need to then be able to do analysis and processing to turn that data into information and then ultimately into intelligence. And you talked on and touched on a number of the traditional collection methods of human intelligence, of signals intelligence, which encompasses both communications and electronic intelligence disciplines or subdisciplines. And there's geospatial intelligence and image, which has a subset of under it of imagery intelligence, and then this new idea of open source intelligence, which in some cases actually draws from publicly available information that sits under those other traditional collection methods. Imagery intelligence. There's a large amount of publicly available imagery. So what was in the past something that only governments could collect is now a commercial enterprise in many cases. And so how do we make sure we are aware of those sources of information, and then how do we how can we incorporate them into our collection plans, and then incorporate them and use them as part of our analysis and processing? And the use of tools, software tools and applications is critical as we think about how to deal with the volume of data. And there's the volume of public data that is exponentially growing on a day-by-day basis. I think I've read somewhere or heard a speaker on a podcast talk about the fact that each week or month the world now generates enough data, or an equal amount of data to that was captured in the first, or the last 2,000 years of human endeavor is now being generated, weeks/months as opposed to, millennia. So that's publicly available, and then there's the private data collection that through militaries and governments and states, private means of collection. But equally, that amount of data has also exponentially increased. So to talk to the skills and the capabilities of our current and our future workforce has to talk about data literacy and being skilled and knowledgeable in the data sciences, be that data analytics, data languages, so coding, data visualization, are all disciplines and skills that we need to build into our current workforce, but they are going to be, I think, essential qualifications or essential skills of our future workforce. So I'd certainly say that data literacy is one area that has increasing prominence and relevance. I think the other thing that we need to build into our workforce, part of which is already there, certainly in the military and intelligence workforce, is the idea of teaming. And I talked about it before with regards to the J2 branch. We can't do what we do unilaterally. We need to work across services groups. We need to build teams, task organised teams. We also need to build teams of teams, working across whole of government departments, but also working with our allied and international partners and friends, and also building teams with perhaps what would be considered today, or what would have been considered in the past, non-traditional partners such as academics and think tanks and industry. And whilst we don't, in some cases we badge them as non-traditional partners, actually, if you go back and look at the way in which we went about trying to characterise the threat and the operating environments of during the Second World War, then you'll find that the military's worked closely with academics, think tanks of the day, industry of the day. So this idea of teaming is not, I don't think, new to the intelligence professional. An area that perhaps is new in the teaming for the future is machine-human teaming. And I think that is an area that we need to explore as we look at the role that mass data will play in the intelligence process and making sense of that data. Then I think human machine teaming will be an important component of the future. So there's some initial areas that I think about. The things that are enduring though in the future intelligence workforce are our people, and will remain still central to all parts of the intelligence cycle. Perhaps, we will be able to use technology and systems to improve dissemination. We obviously have a strong use of technology already in collection, but the role of the human in both the direction of and in collection and in analysis will remain prominent. And that means our people need to be, I think, professionally curious. They need to be committed to a continuous learning and thinking about thinking. So how to critically analyze, problem frame, and be committed to constantly learning and upskilling to build their skills and knowledge. I think our people and our future workforce absolutely have to be excellent communicators. And that's as you know, Maz, that's something that we seek from our workforce today, but I think it remains just as important, if not perhaps even more important, into the future. And by communicator, I mean excellent listening skills, along with the traditional verbal communication and written communication, are enduring skills and knowledge that we must have. And we must be skeptical. We must remain skeptical and constantly question and look to validate the data that we are analysing.
So, sorry, that's just a wonderful point that you made there, because I just want to jump in on that and double click on it, because I think that strikes me as a particularly important one, to be critical, because that's especially the ever increasing amount of data coming in, more sensors coming in, inevitably, and social science. So these are the hard sciences, the data, but social science will tell us that when there's too much information, we take shortcuts, our heuristics will take over, and of course our bias, which is of course what one of the principal challenges of intelligence and intelligence analysis is how do we actually, when you're talking about characterizing threats and reducing ambiguity, how do we actually do that whilst making sure that we're really applying the mirror on ourselves and making sure that our preconceived ideas and notions are not completely skewing the information that we see. And we've seen this happen time and time and again. And I guess the 9/11 Commission found that the most important failure was one of imagination. It wasn't one of, not having the information there. It was just not being, it was just thinking in a single track mind. I wonder if you have anything more to say to that.
Yeah, look, history shows us that it continues to be our, a weak spot or a blind spot is the impact of our biases on the way in which we approach our analysis. And the same can be said for all human endeavour, is that we're victims of our own biases in informing our decision making. So you're right, we've got to build in assurance mechanisms, and I think in the collection phase we build a degree of validation and assurance through layering of collection, so as to not rely upon a single source of collection to provide the sole insight and the sole data point. You want multiple data points of the same issue and the same topic to try and build in that redundancy and resilience and way of validation. I think in our analysis, you constantly have to have a contest of ideas and discussion. So, the use of things like structured analytical techniques to provide a discipline and a framework around how to think about the information you have. But equally, things like structured analytical techniques also force the group through facilitation to step outside and a step away from their biases, because they're able to be called out or identified through a facilitated activity. Ideas and approaches such as red teaming, where people deliberately, apply the de Bono red hat and contest and challenge the group and the consensus. So using those discipline frameworks can help build contestation, and they can also help, I think, open up imagination for alternative futures. And that's something that I think is, something that we should continue to value is the use of structured techniques to help people imagine different outcomes and different futures, perhaps that aren't readily able to be seen based on the data that they're looking at, on a daily basis.
And I guess the follow-on question from that is how to what extent are you comfortable that we're achieving that institutionally as an organization, that we're inculcating that sense of curiosity and challenging the dominant narratives, whether through red teaming or purely through being critical? How comfortable are you that we're hitting the mark?
Look, I think we absolutely value that approach to our work, but it's like, in some cases, it's, think about it through an opposite, that it's just happening. You've got to check, and you've got to build a monitoring and an assurance model into the way you do business to ensure that those things are happening and not being parked or put aside in the interests of time, tempo, or relative priorities. So it's really important that you through leadership, leaders at all levels, having the courage and the discipline to apply those governance measures or points of contestation, and not sort of go, look, it'd be easier if we just got to get this done. So don't worry about running it through a red team, or don't worry about using a structured analytical technique. Let's just quickly spitball what we think, and that'll become our most likely course of action. So we've got to constantly check, and we've got to apply leadership and empower our leaders to feel like they have the authority to and the courage, they've got the permission to have that moral courage to apply, processes that sometimes may actually cause us to slow down and have to, delay outcomes or present ideas or positions that may not be aligned to the group think or the consensus of thinking.
So on that moral courage piece, where is that instilled and how is it done? And I ask this because, of course, we ourselves as an organization and institution have faced some of our own challenges, of course, with moral courage and people getting, how shall I put it, sucked in by the moment. And I guess at the risk of being ostracized from a group, didn't necessarily speak up. So how do we actually, build that moral courage, especially because oftentimes our intelligence personnel are rather young, not necessarily have lived a full life of world experience, and it is actually quite challenging to speak up when the groupthink is heading one way. It's a lot easier to go with the dominant narrative.
Yeah, you're right, Maz, and it is a persistent challenge that we must constantly consider and look to put in place the right resources and support mechanisms to ensure that all our teams are best prepared and appropriately supported to absolutely fulfil their role honestly and with the level of moral courage. So I think it starts at day one of joining, in this case, the military profession. Day one, inculcating that and explaining that they have the power and the authority to call out and speak up when they see unacceptable behaviour or questionable practices or unprofessional practices. So that starts day one. That you can't afford to be a bystander in an organisation that is based on the strength of the team. So and that individual actions can reduce the effectiveness of the team. So you've got to call out when people are misleading, misdirecting, or obviously mistreating other members of the team. So that needs to be from the outset. It needs to be demonstrated to them that it works. So they've got to be able to see, it's that see it, be it type model. So there's got to be active live application of it demonstrated to them, and throughout the course of your career you need to keep that message being empowered and keep calling out and highlighting when it is being delivered, so that it's not just when the positive and the constructive are occurring, we actually call that out and highlight it and say, see, this is what happens when you do this, the right outcome occurs. When you stand up, when you speak up, when you're not a bystander, you're an upstand, then it achieves the desired effect with the right outcome. So, and I know that sounds, it sounds easier than it is, but
that's what it is.
That's what it is. It is. It's not. If it was easy, we wouldn't find ourselves being challenged by it on a regular basis, and that's from the very minor to the most severe. But I think leadership in the intelligence enterprise is just as important as it is in any other enterprise, and intelligence professionals who have responsibilities to lead and manage and coordinate and take responsibility over others have to understand that they have a leadership responsibility, and we need to provide them the tools and the resources and the training and the experiences to be leaders. So we need to, just as much as we need to invest in their professional intelligence skills of whatever that might be, as a collector or as an analyst, we need to invest in their leadership skills and knowledge as well. That if you want them to take responsibility for people and outcomes, then we've got to invest that time, because it's something that must be practiced, it must be learnt, and you must invest time in it just as much as you invest time in your other skills, your other knowledge areas and building your attributes.
Yeah.
And I think it's as important, or in some cases, if you talked about, if not more important, for the intelligence professional, because of the consequences of some of the scenarios and operating environments in which they're providing that advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just echo some thoughts. I recently interviewed David Wedham and Dean Peter Baker as well, separately. And this came up with both of those, military ethicists, about the environment that we created and the role leadership plays in it. It's behavior is an interplay of an individual personality with the environment that they find themselves in, which is why good people end up doing bad things, or can end up doing bad things if a number of different things are in place. Whether that might be fatigue, whether that might be peer pressure, confused mission set, desensitization to war, whatever other factors that might influence how that person's feeling at that point in time, when they encounter some version of chaos. Whatever that might be in their instance, whether as an intelligence analyst or as a special forces soldier or regular infantryman on the ground, all of that will shape how they behave. And ethics, unfortunately, comes into play a little bit too late, or to think about it, which is why the training piece that you talk about is so important to, I guess, build as close as possible the environment that we're likely to face on the battlefield, in a training setting, so that the first time we confront these ethical challenges is not when we're out on an operational deployment somewhere. But that, of course, means that we need to try and replicate all of those various pressures that we experience. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on, or if you've seen that done well, or particularly in the intelligence space, how we can, I guess, bolster that realistic training, immersive training experience.
Yeah, I think our collective training environment absolutely has to replicate as close as possible the likely operating environments that we'll find ourselves in. So as to do exactly what you've said, Maz, which is to create the situation in which people can see what right and potentially what not right looks like, but in a safe environment where the ability to then actively learn from that through active debriefing of, hey, here's a scenario, here was either what your actions were and the consequences. Let's actively debrief that through an appropriate and facilitated debriefing structure so as to provide that learning opportunity. Or here's a scenario that's played out and you can tell us what you see here and give us your impressions and seek for them to identify, obviously self-identify where there was, where perhaps right was not, the right approach was applied. And that's that courage to, in some cases, it's creating a training environment that allows and encourages failure and then allows you to learn through that failure. And failure doesn't have to be catastrophic failure. It's small decisions that may not have been the best decision, but you've got to create a training environment that allows you to make those not best decisions, but also then a feedback cycle where you can actively engage, discuss, analyze, and then re-engage at some point in the training system, training activity, for them to apply that next lot of or new knowledge that they've had as a result of that debriefing process and self-reflection that we've got to teach people to value self-reflection as well on their decision making and their actions. So I think the training environment does present opportunities like that. Can we create more of them? Absolutely. I honestly think that that's what the ADF is committed to doing in building more complex, deep, immersive training environments, is to do exactly that. Create those challenging, both physically, morally, and emotionally challenging environments that we'll potentially find ourselves in on operations, to do that inside of our training environments. And the other way we need to practice it and train it is in our day-to-day work. We don't need to have dedicated training events as well. We can practice a lot of these skills and demonstrate the appropriate values through our daily life, through our daily business. And we can use that as learning opportunities. We've just got to encourage our leaders, team leaders, to use the day-to-day business for collective learning by having reflection periods, by having debriefs, and giving them that time to do that with their teams, so that they have the ability to learn from the recent past, whatever that might be that they've been doing, and both as individuals and as groups reflect and share their understandings of what they've learned, and then apply for the next day or the next activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, that comes back to that leadership piece. It's absolutely critical that becomes part of a leader's toolkit, is to encourage that self-reflection piece without a fear of any reprimand, but more about getting to know ourselves better. And this is actually a really neat segue into when we're talking about knowing ourselves better. Australia is an Anglophone nation where English is the official language. However, we are arguably the world's most successful migrant nation, with I think around 23% of our citizens born overseas. So, in other words, we have this wealth of untapped resources within our own borders that could really help us understand the complex cultural ecosystems that exist around the world. Now, this is particularly important when it comes to understanding our immediate region of Southeast Asia, but also, beyond and further afield. My question to you is, are we investing sufficient resources in understanding the cultural diversity and ecosystems that exist in our region? Another tough one, I know.
I think we're... No. And look, could we be doing more? Yes. Are we doing enough? Probably not yet. But are we invested in it, and have we identified it as an area of continuous learning and continuous improvement? Absolutely. And I think, and I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of the Australian Defence College, for example, and the Commandant there, but I know you've spoken recently to the former Commandant of the Australian Defence College, General Ryan, but the work that he and his leadership team put in over the last few years to build the curriculum and increase the access to things, to learning opportunities about culture and languages and self-reflection and emotional intelligence and things that help you be a better person. Because even if you don't necessarily have the specific language skill, if you understand how you present yourself to others and how you are perceived by others, then you can adapt more readily anyway to whichever group and cultural group you're interacting with. So whilst it may not be the gold plate solution of being a linguist, a well-versed linguist with deep anthropological understanding of the host nation in which you're partnering with, working in, or is an adversary to you, you've built the foundational skills to give yourself the best chance of having success in that operating environment with the relevant culture, because we've invested in you understanding yourself and how you present and how you communicate. And that usually, not always, but would usually mean that as individuals you'll be well placed to adapt to when you're in your interactions with others, especially those from international cultures. But there's still specialist knowledge that we need to apply, and I think it's been fantastic to see the breadth of access that is being made available to all ranks, to people at all ranks through a whole range of different mediums. So not necessarily residential courses where you have to go to Canberra or go to a certain location. It's online, it's learn at your own pace. So it can be done, at various speeds depending on your availability. And it's focusing on, topics of cultural understanding, cultural intelligence, and that is, a really good start. Like I said, can we be doing more? Probably. and the challenge is, how do we prioritise it as well, Maz? Because as you've pointed out, each nation state, each language group has a unique and fascinating and rich culture, and then often there's subcultures to that, just like there is in our country and within organisations. So, how do we prioritise which ones we need to focus on to build depth of knowledge and deep experience, and that's a challenge, because there's a finite resource, resources both in terms of people we've got and time, which is often our greatest and most constrained resource. So there's always going to be some that we want to put more priority on, but we can't for a range of different reasons, and that's always difficult. But I think what we need to do is have the discussion about what are we prioritising, and being clear on how we are investing in those that we have prioritised. So making sure that we are, if it's agreed, through consensus that a certain place, group, organisation is the priority of effort, then we need to make sure we've aligned the necessary resources against that to make to align, just like any main effort should be, where it should get the preponderance of resources and effort. We should do that as well with regards to building our knowledge and understanding of culture and languages.
I couldn't agree more, and of course I'm slightly biased when I ask that question. I mean, I'm one of the co-facilitators of one of those courses run by the Australian Defence College, so the Culture and Armed Conflict course, which I'm a really strong supporter of that type of, I guess, institutionalized approach to getting to understand our environment. I think we've learned, and I had Dr. Mike Martin on the podcast a couple of times, who actually helped set up that course, but also he's an author of An Intimate War, and I'm sure you're familiar with his work, and studying the cultural context of Helmand and the failures of British military in Helmand, and this is somebody who I've spoken to a number of times, and we've publicly discussed it. And Afghanistan is a good example of the importance of culture. We often say, or at least I've often said in this podcast, is we never fought the war we thought we fought, because it was biased through our own interpretation of what we saw on the ground. And I put myself in this as well. I'm guilty of this. I misunderstood what the Taliban is back in the days that I was there, and it's quite often easy to fall into the kind of narrow track version of definitions. Now, when we're looking in our region, that problem set is exponentially larger, exponentially more dense, and of course, in my view, it should be a real priority, because how we interplay with various ecosystems is, of course, going to shape their behavior. And if we're continuously exposing ourselves to cultural faux pas, so to call them, then of course that's degrading our own ability to build rapport, maintain rapport, and therefore build relationships, or long-lasting relationships. So I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, this is an important step, and of course I'm very biased in my own views. So
no, look, to pile in, Maz, I agree, and whilst I highlighted the Australian Defence College's efforts, and I wasn't aware that you were a co-host, so I didn't mean to,
I'm taking it as a free plug.
Reinforce the good work that you've been doing. Yeah, that's right. Well done. I think what it's also highlighted is the value of that teaming approach, and teaming with other organisations. So what we've recognised is that the military and the ADF and the department isn't the font of all expertise, and we're absolutely comfortable and confident to reach out to experts from across a wide range of organisations, really positively in host nations. So going to them and saying, hey, we want to work and partner with you to learn more about your culture and understand, because your country and our country have agreed that we want to work together and grow and build our relationship. Well, we feel that to help to do that on our behalf, we need to learn from you about how you think about the world and your worldview. And so we've built new partnerships and encouraged experts from around the world and from the region to come and be engaged with us. And they don't need to be physically engaged. The COVID pandemic has prevented a lot of that physical engagement. We've embraced, multimedia technology to engage virtually. We've also, I think, embraced the opportunities presented by the communities within Australia that represent diaspora and representatives of those regional and global cultures, and ask them to be part of the discussion and part of the engagement for us to help us learn. So, and which I think they value. They really, many of them welcome the chance to come and tell us more and teach us more about their traditional cultures and heritage, ancestral heritage, which is great.
Absolutely, and perhaps and noting the time as well. I'll start bringing it towards the end. A question that I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on is whether intelligence as a discipline has too much power or not enough power in the overall, I guess, military establishment.
Look, I think the easy answer is it depends. I think our defence establishment over the last 2 decades has seen the value that dedicated professional intelligence officials, people, workforce can provide to help them make sense of the environment in which we are working and living in. I think they've seen the value of investing in all parts of the intelligence cycle, from direction through to dissemination. But like any discipline and any part of a professional organisation, you can't rest on what you did yesterday. You've got to constantly engage and demonstrate the utility and the benefits of what you offer for tomorrow. And so, and you've got to remain relevant. You've got to demonstrate how you're remaining relevant. The way in which you and I learnt the basics of the intelligence cycle look very different to the way that the most junior and newest members of our profession are learning about the application of the intelligence cycle in 2022. And if you and I, as people that were educated in a different type of contextual mindset, don't have the willingness to adapt and adjust, then we'll quickly make the enterprise as a whole, less relevant because we aren't demonstrating that agility to adapt to the changing environment. So I don't think it's got too much, and I don't think it's got, or likewise, I don't think it's got not enough. I think we've got to demonstrate that we're relevant and that we value add where we should value add, and we demonstrate our professionalism by being committed to being, commitment to excellence and professional mastery. I think General Orme, a former commander of the 1st Division and may have also been a commandant of the Australian Defence College, I think, in previous years, but General Craig Orme, he had a mantra of brilliant at the basics, or brilliance at the basics. And I think that's how we may remain relevant if we are committed as professional master, to maintain professional mastery in the intelligence field and not rest on our laurels, and remain committed to continuously learning and adapting to meet the needs of the, in this case, or for me, the Australian Defence Force and the Defence organisation, but for all of our colleagues and peers across government and across our allies and partners to meet the need of their respective their governments as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps my last question to you today is, with the benefit of hindsight and having lived through the strategic shifts over the past 2 decades, if you could change one thing of the defence intelligence enterprise, if you could have changed it, say, 10 years ago, what would it be?
That's a really hard question, Maz. I think from a military intelligence, and I probably should even characterize it down into the for me, the Army intelligence, which is what my parents' service is. I think the thing that, as a junior officer, and I'll go back further than 10 years, I'll go back when I joined the Corps some 20 odd years ago, is the importance of leadership as equal a attribute as professional intelligence mastery. That's for the officer corps anyway, within the intelligence space. But I think it holds at every level, is that you need to be not just the best analyst or the best collector, but you also need to understand that certainly as you gain experience and rank in the military, you have a leadership responsibility, and valuing your development as a leader as much as you value your development as an intelligence professional is something that and I'm happy to be, I'm sure that's going to create some debate, but my initial observations when I reflect back on my time may not have been had equal value applied to both. And I think we've seen the importance of leadership in the intelligence enterprise manifest itself and be so powerful in the last 15 odd years plus as we became operationally active and valued as a part of the operational team.
And I really do hope that creates some discussions, because I couldn't agree more that we're seeing the importance and power of leadership not only in the last 20 years, but we're seeing it play out now. We're watching it live on TV play out in Ukraine as we speak. On that note, Brigadier Mark Ascough, thank you very much for giving me so much of your time. I can only imagine how busy you are, keeping up to date with everything that's happening in the world. So to take out more than an hour to speak with me on the podcast is truly appreciated. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Maz, and thank you for having the courage and the commitment to deliver the Voice of War podcast, and you, along with some of your other officer colleagues over the last 5 to 10 years of being prepared to make your own time, in your own time, do these types of activities to promote professional learning, promote debate. Are really valuable and powerful, and it talks to one of the points you raised today about how do we prepare for the future. It's about having a commitment to learning and learning from others, and this is what your podcast does really well. And I, along with a range of others that are being delivered by military personnel in their spare time or former full-time serving members. So thanks for making the effort. Hopefully I've contributed to the discussion. I'm very conscious that my experiences of war are far less than many of your previous speakers, and I absolutely respect their experiences and their sacrifices in many cases, and have welcomed the chance to add to the discussion, but I'm very conscious of just where the limits of my experiences lie in comparison to some of your other speakers. So really, really appreciate it, and look forward to catching up again in person when the opportunity permits.
Thanks very much. And thank you for saying those nice words. And looking forward to catching up in person soon.
Thanks, Maz.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Voices of War. And since you got this far, please consider showing your support by liking and reviewing the show wherever you catch your pods. Also, if you're able, please consider showing your support through our Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee page. Links to both are in the show notes. Thank you, and until next time.